Here now to discuss the war in Ukraine as well as the weapons being used is CBS News foreign policy and national security advisor H.R. McMaster. General, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to Studio 57.
Hey, thanks, Nancy. Great to be with you and Tanya.
Well, we saw in that report the weapons that are being used there. Where are those weapons coming from and what types of artillery is being sent right now?
So what you need is a broad range of weapons to address the fundamental problem, which is to stop the Russians from bombarding residential areas indiscriminately and committing really the mass murder of innocents. And so the range of weapons include long-range surveillance capabilities. I hope that these will include what the U.S. made MQ-9, which is a system that can see very deeply and identify the delivery systems of the Russians before they launch these missiles. So you need surveillance, and then you need that tied to long-range fires, because while you want to shoot down the arrows that are coming at you in the form of drones and missiles, you have to be able to kill the archer as well. And then that is tied to these intermediate range air defense systems, which are able to shoot down those missiles and to shoot down those drones. And it's important to point out that some of these drones now, many of these drones, are coming from Iran. And Iran is actually sending Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps personnel to the Russian-occupied portions of Ukraine to assemble them. So this is a really important, I think, initiative by the part of NATO and all the other coalition countries to give Ukraine what it needs to protect itself.
General, I'm curious though why this has taken so long, because Ukraine has been asking for anti-aircraft help since the very beginning of the invasion, and I remember the calculus then was, well, we can't do that because we might accidentally hit a Russian plane. It would inadvertently start World War III. That calculus has clearly changed.
That's right. This is what's frustrating. I think, what if we had done at the outset what we've done now in terms of provision of weapons capabilities? What if we had done it after Putin telegraphed that he was going to renew the invasion of Ukraine last August? Maybe that wouldn't have happened at all. So I think the time is now to lift these restrictions. The idea that a certain weapon system will be provocative, I think now is kind of nutty. Right? What we know that what provokes Putin is weakness and his belief maybe that he can still divide, our coalition and NATO and really convince us with these threats that he's making, rattling his nuclear saber, that he'll get us to constrain ourselves in terms of the support for the Ukrainians.
Right.
Well, in general, on that note, you mentioned the nuclear threat. How real is it right now from Putin, especially when we look at the desperation that he clearly has at this point? Does the West supplying these weapons perhaps add to that risk?
I don't think so, Tanya. In fact, I think, I'm sorry, Nancy. No. I don't think so. I think really giving Ukraine these capabilities, I think, can be a deterrent. For example, long-range fires. If Ukraine has the ability, maybe not use it, but has the ability to employ long-range fires against Russian facilities in Crimea, which is illegally occupied, but even into Russian territory, maybe Putin will think twice. And while we have to take seriously any threat of a nuclear weapon, when you look at Ukraine, I just don't think a nuclear weapon is usable from a military perspective. And then what happens? The rest of the world recognizes his hostility. And he becomes, North Korea on the Volga, essentially.
So, General, taking a step back, how do you think this conflict is going? Ukraine has made some strides, right? We know that Russia is asking its Russian civilians in Kherson or Russians to evacuate. How do you feel it's going? Where will this finally terminate?
Well, thanks to the courage of the Ukrainians, their will to fight. It's going very well for Ukraine from a military perspective at this moment. There are two main counteroffensives, one in the northern part of the country, in which Ukraine has reestablished control of 1,200 square kilometers, very significant, but turned the Russians out of their prepared defenses. Down in Kherson, which is very important strategically, because if the Ukrainians retake Kherson, they can kind of unlock their access again to the Black Sea coast and deny that access to the Russians. That's going very well also because the Russians were not quite very smart about this. They concentrated some of their best units on the west side of the river. The Ukrainians have destroyed the bridges, and they've also destroyed the logistics depots with some of these longer-range artillery systems. You might have heard the term HIMARS. And now what that forces the Russians to do is to throughput their supplies all the way from Russia. Then they hit the Kerch Strait Bridge that goes into Crimea, and that leads to these big logistics hubs. So the forces are being choked off, the Russian forces, and I don't think it's tenable. And if you look at the casualties the Russians have taken, I think the Russian army is at the breaking point.
So you're bullish on Ukraine?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
That's good news to hear. HR McMaster, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight as always.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Nancy.
Good to see you.